Hey world, welcome back to the RC Air Experience. We have our first official guest on this podcast, and it's going to be an exciting one. I'm Jonathan from the lighter side of RC. We got Anthony from FPV Builds, and we have FRSKY Steve joining us as our first official guest. So welcome, Steve.
Hey,
nice to have you on the podcast.
Great being here. Thank you for making me the first guest. This is exciting.
Gotcha.
All right.
We have him down as FRSKY Steve because I tried pronouncing his last name and it just wasn't happening. So it was just easier to go with that.
It's Ramirez.
So how's it going, Steve? Thank you for coming on the podcast.
I was doing fantastic. I enjoy being here. We have a lot to talk about because my phone blew up. I mean, you don't know how many fans you have, Jonathan, until that video came out.
Nice.
We were talking about the video that John made with the controllers, right? The receive the transmitter video.
Yes. And then
lots of fans and quite a few haters too. So
you got a few more haters, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Steve, before we get into the juicy conversations,
yes,
just. I've always wondered, right? I know I first met you probably 3 or 4 years ago through the iNav fixed wing group, and when I was starting out, and I messaged you, and I got to say, Steve's always been a great guy. He's always been willing to help people in the community, and I saw his name in the group, and I sent him a message, and he's like, "Hey, I have a minute to hop on the call with you right now. If you want, I can walk you through it." And I was like, "Yeah, sure." I was just looking for a message, and so thank you for that, and
appreciate it.
It shows what kind of person you are. So that's great. The community needs people like that. So
and I do that for a living now. Yeah,
that was fun. So just give us a little background. How long have you been in RC for? How did you get involved with that iNav fixed wing group? You're one of the founding members, right?
Yeah, I started it in December 18th, 2018.
That's kind of now, right? I mean.
It's got huge. Well, I mean, essentially what happened was I knew absolutely nobody in iNav community. I know none of the developers. I just decided I'm going to start a group. I call it iNav Fixed Wing Group. Wow. And what I did is I started it because I wanted to learn more about iNav, and I figured that it would be like maybe 200 members, and we'll share videos from our planes, and that'll be about it. And within the first day we had 250 members, and it was people kept signing up like round the clock. I finally had to get someone in he was in the Netherlands to help out because I'm like, I have to go to bed and people are still wanting to join the group. So I'm like, you're still awake right now, right? Oh yeah, it's morning time for me. Okay, great. I'm gonna make you the moderator. So
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, that was great. But what was interesting about that was that this was a community that at the time iNav was, I know they don't like hearing this, but it was essentially, it was Betaflight with GPS. So it was an alternative to Betaflight, and they just happened to have a little bit of work done. So it would work with fixed wing. Some people have figured it out. And I started the group and I found other people like myself who didn't know anything about it. And some people knew about it. And it was kind of like we just shared ideas, and the group grew, and I found the right people, and the thing took off. And then it was one of those things where it was, the fixed wing aspect of iNav was just something like, something else we do. And it went from that to being like the main reason to bring people into iNav. So it was the community engagement that really brought the whole, I'd say, brought this to where it's at now. It's just that we had the right people, a couple key people like Mark Hoffman and Darren Lines, who's also known as Falling with Style Mr. D. He does a lot of the videos for FRSKY. So those are brought those guys in, all of a sudden things really just exploded, and it was really a lot of fun, and so a very rewarding experience.
Yeah, and they're developers, right? Mark's a developer.
Somewhat, yeah. He does some developing. It's mainly Darren, but Darren's got a new job, so he's not. He's super busy. He's got a job in the industry right now. He doesn't really talk a lot about what he does. It's just kind of like it must be something commercial drone related, and that's about it. All we can really mention about it.
Yeah.
So
I've
I have
seen
a
on
question
that
for
grow.
you.
Go ahead, John.
I have a question for you, Steve, for somebody like the layman like myself that isn't involved in that side of the hobby. So is iNav part of FRSKY, or is it separate, or what's the correlation there?
Okay, so iNav is absolutely not part of FRSKY. iNav is a open source platform, and it's essentially like Betaflight. What it does, it's a flight controller. So Betaflight is the flight controllers that are used in drones. So it's basically the brains. It's the firmware that controls the flight controller, and essentially it's the whole operating system that makes the drones fly. All they did is they took that and put it to airplanes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, John, remember we were talking about this, I think, in episode 1 or 2. So we were talking about how you could flip a switch on a remote and the plane will loiter over your head, or it'll do a So they basically took the technology and the firmware that was used for quadcopters that were doing that kind of stuff, and they put it in airplanes, and that's what iNav. iNav can be used on drones, and there's a whole group of people who put it on drones, but it's mainly for fixed wings. It was designed mainly for.
It's really cool because you wear goggles and you can see a heads-up display, and you can get all your telemetry. You can see where home is. So if you're flying somewhere unfamiliar, and that's one of the main things, where sometimes you end up flying somewhere and you have no idea where you're standing, and if it was up to you, you couldn't find your way back. But it'll literally point. This is where home is.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a little arrow in the goggle that shows you where home is.
Cool. It's really cool. It shows you how high up you are, how far away you are, how fast you're going, everything.
So I've seen recently. I do dabble with iNav. I play with iNav, but I've gotten the last year or two. I've gotten more into just throwing a receiver in a plane and flying with FPV and a regular receiver, just like that. Quick and dirty setups. But I've seen a lot lately within the group of people branching out of the typical iNav, what you would think would be an iNav wing, and putting them into jets, not turbine jets, but EDF jets.
EDF, right.
I've seen them put them in gas planes. So it's starting to branch out, because think about it. It's basically like a gyro that you would use, John.
Yeah.
Right? It's got flight controls. You could set up like how much control you want the gyro basically to have over the plane. It's got satellites, so it's got a GPS.
Obviously more automation, basically.
It's got more automation, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
But it's definitely growing into the kinds of planes that it's being put into.
Right, and the main thing is that eventually what's going to happen is that this is all going to be part of the ethos, not ethos of FRSKY, but part of the whole universe of RC. And the idea right now is that people don't want to fail. So, I mean, if they have a plane that they can take out, and iNav is now working on landing. So you can, there's an auto takeoff and auto landing. So, and the plane will fly itself.
Yep.
So, yeah,
it's crazy.
It is insane.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
and you were talking about that. You were talking about that, John, how, you're not a big gyro fan, but when you're coming in for a landing, being able to use the gyro for landing is like a dream come true, right?
Well, we've got it set up, or at least the way I generally set it up is, normal flying gain, it can be off and it doesn't matter. But when I'm coming in for a landing, that gain's almost doubled, because it just locks your plane in, right? And makes landing so much better and easier. So it's really beneficial in that sense.
Absolutely. What kind of, you're flying turbine jets?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, pretty much 99% of what I fly is turbine jets. I've got some gassers and things like that, but they don't do anything for me. So it's pretty much turbine stuff.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. So any particular turbine you like? Are you a King Tech? Are you?
Well, I'm a Swewin dealer, so I pretty
Freewin
much
dealer.
have to say Swewin is awesome.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah,
I also like FRSKY turbines as well too, so they're like my second choice.
yeah.
But basically, those two are my favorites. So
Fantastic. Yeah, Treewin, absolutely great company.
Yeah.
So we dealt with them, and I've just heard of FRSKY over like the last 6 months, so they're interesting. So cool. And
Steve, so how long have you been in the hobby for?
well, that's the $1 million question. Essentially, what happened was, believe it or not, I'm over age 30. So
That's unbelievable. I can't believe it.
I know it's
You don't look a day over 25.
yeah. Perhaps it's the bald receding hairline or whatever. But yeah, so when I was about 7, that's when the RC hobby really started to explode. And you got to keep in mind the RC hobby back then, that was state of the art. This was amazing. This is the future. You would have, and I remembered I really wanted an RC plane. And I was 7 years old, and there's no hope. My dad couldn't build anything, right? It's just kind of, I have stories but I remember about age 15 or 16, I walked into a hobby shop and I said, I want to get into flying RC planes. And guy said, okay, what do you want? And I said, how much is a plane? And he said, well, the basic kit's only about $20 to $30. And I'm like, oh, that's not bad. I can afford that. And he goes, but you need more. You need servos, you're going to need motor, you're going to need, and a radio. And he said, don't even try to add it up. It's over $1,000. He said, take you 40 hours to build your first plane. You're going to crash it. Do you still want it? So thank you very much.
What was your first plane, Balsa? Was it a
No, my first plane was actually a Zaggy. So it was this, it was made out of packaging material. It was this company that was out of here in Southern California that they basically started foaming planes. It was a flying wing. And I bought it, put it together, took it out, launched it, threw it at the ground 40 times, gave up, had the transmitter in my garage. It was an old high-tech transmitter. And but the one thing I did before I finally gave up on everything was I went and got a copy of Real Flight 2.5.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And about every night I would sit there for about an hour and I would just kind of figure out how to fly an RC plane. Yeah. And then I went to a flying field, my local one, and they, let me fly their plane. And I'm sitting there doing rolls and loops. And I'm like, oh, this is really amazing. So about 2016, I went to one of my friends, and this is I think one of the hardest things. And the reason why I'm always trying to pay him forward and always looking out for the hobby is I went to one of my friends and said, listen, I've tried this before. I couldn't do it. I sucked at it. And I need you to help me. And, it's as a dude, it's hard to go say to another guy, hey, I need your help and I want to do this. Absolutely. But, he at least got me going. And, from there, I was able to get a bunch of cheap little foamies and start flying planes. And it was just kind of it just took. That's all I wanted to do. And when I got into INAV, it was oh my God, this is amazing. But then, the thing is after this, coming back to flying line of sight planes, there was just a lot of things I didn't really understand before I started working for FRSKY as how a plane should be put together, how you tune it, what a good flying plane feels like. I'm starting to find right now that if you could have even a cheap little plane the Bixler 2 from Hobby King is about a $60 plane, and it's a piece of I love the guys at Hobby King. Tommy, don't get offended. But it's a piece of junk when you buy the kit. It's not the greatest plane ever. Yeah. However, the foam is fantastic. And if you build it yourself, and I've gone through, it's it flies much better than a $60 plane. So, and that was the thing, able to go in there. Now seeing what you can do with the radio and what all these different flight modes you can do, it's just crazy how much fun you can have with a fixed wing plane. Yeah. So that's kind of what I'm seeing.
So awesome. What's your how many planes do you have? Because John's going to ask this because he's baffled at the amount that I have behind me. How many do you have, and what's your favorite current plane that you have right now?
So I was just having a conversation today with a local hobby store owner, and I said, I would like. I have a. It's a long story. I end up buying a bunch of someone's model kits because he was next to me at a swap meet, and he just needed money. The guy was unfortunately dying, and he's trying to sell off all these plastic model kits. And I took over to the hobby store, sold them all, and they said you have $750 credit. And I'm like, oh, I have all these planes I want to buy, but I have no space. And the hobby store dealer was like, well, you can bring in the planes you don't want anymore over to the store. We'll sell them for you, and you can buy more.
Wow.
Like, fantastic. This is done and done. This is happening. I have, at one point, I counted 100 planes.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah, I know. It was, but I mean, a lot of these are like small little things. And
right.
Yeah.
And
yeah, see that baffles me for sure. Like Anthony said, that blows my mind how many planes you guys have. So,
how many do you have, Anthony?
Depending on whether my wife watches this episode or not, give or take 50.
Okay, you're working at it. Keep going. You'll catch up.
I tried to explain to John, like, and you know this coming from our world, right? Like,
yeah.
You could have one of those days where you load everything up, you go to the field with 20 planes, but you come home with 10 of them that are actually still flying. Like, I've had those days, like between landings and just takeoffs or just whatever the situation may be. They're foam RC planes. They're meant to kind of bounce off the ground a little bit, and sometimes they don't come home in all one piece. So
right,
like right now, half of my fleet is probably in some shape or form of disrepair. Like it's just how it works. Take a hard landing, you rip the retracts out of one. All right, well that's down this time. Like, it's just how it is. So it's kind of necessity. Like if I was to go flying right now for a full day, I would probably only have 10 or 11 planes that I'd be able to take with me that fly.
Yeah.
Which is still, I get it. That's still a lot of planes, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of that day, I come home with 5 of them. So you see how it starts to like go down little by little?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I mean, with my turbines, if we have something that goes wrong, we basically fix it right away, right? It's,
right. Right.
You can't have 100 turbines.
No, you can have a lot, but that's a lot of money for sure.
Yeah. You got to keep in mind, we probably have the same amount of money in the planes. You just happen to have, I spread it out over a lot of planes.
Yeah, of course.
Sometimes they don't come back, That's.
I gotta say, John's probably one of John's planes is my entire collection. So, yeah.
Say, listen, I know I'm supposed to be the guest here, but man, we gotta get into this, John.
All right, ask away.
All right, this is the $1 million. So essentially, what happened was the first time I heard your name was actually from Lior. He mentioned you. Yeah. And so he contacted me one day, and you were talking to me about I want to do a radio test, and so maybe fill us in as to what happened. What was that about?
So I was how that whole idea of the video came about is I was down at Montana Jets in 2023, so this year. So it would have been June of this year. And my friends down there that live in Montana, they're at the event, and they said, we've always wanted to do a radio test. We've kind of done it in this manner. So they kind of presented to me the idea, and I said, you know what? That's a really cool idea. Like, it's just going to be super simple, just a straight distance test. It'll accomplish kind of some cool things. And so I basically jumped on it, and I said, I'll work on it when we get back. So I think we got back, maybe near the end of June, and I started kind of putting some feelers out to different people like yourself.
Right.
I sent an email to Futaba USA. They responded but said no. I reached out to Powerbox, and the thing about reaching out to Powerbox is they were on board, and it was, he's like, yeah, absolutely. So that was super cool. I was really excited about that. The other radios we just managed to find because I fly Jetty primarily, and one of my friends had an FRSKY radio, so he gave me that one to use. So that's how the whole radio test came about.
Right. So when you contacted us, I was starting to ask you like for details about everything, and it was it was the problem is that when you do a test like this, it can never be scientific because you
Of
can't
course.
repeat it,
Of
right?
course.
Yeah. So that was, I think we kind of shied away from that one
Yeah.
and left. The other problem was I probably got up and left town like while I was talking to you, and then I got this email one day. Like, here's the video test. It was like a text message. Look at this. And I'm like, oh crap. I think we lost Anthony along the way, by the way.
Oh, I think he just took himself out of
Oh,
the
okay.
picture.
He's still there. Okay.
Um,
Yeah. So I'm like, holy crap. And then, so I'm like watching this and I go to the very end and I'm like, and they're like, oh my gosh, so I get these messages. They start piling in left and other. Look how good you guys did. Oh, this is amazing. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So it was just like, wow. Yeah, this is really cool. But thank you. I mean, I appreciate
well,
it.
and to, I guess, to defend myself a little bit, I fly Jetty.
Right.
I didn't care what the results were for any of the radios,
Right.
right? Like I have no skin in the game. I'm not sponsored by any radio manufacturer. I pay full price for my Jetty products. And I set customers' planes up on any radio system. It doesn't matter to me. So the results of the test really were irrelevant, whether company XYZ performed number 1, 2, 3, whatever it was. So
Right. Yeah. And that was the $1 million. What I noticed was it was kind of, even though it's not scientific, there was just the same. It's not worthless because there was a lot you can pull out of this test.
yeah.
You know. So I was asking you, where do you do the radio test? Was it out in the boonies somewhere, or was it near a city, a major population?
No, so I'm located 20 minutes southeast out of Calgary, so out of town, and we were even about 10 minutes further southeast of where the shop is. So we were in the middle of absolutely nowhere. The only thing that we really had close to us was some acreage homes, and in the video there's some like grain silos beside the highway type thing. So yeah, it was pretty much no. There's nothing around us.
All right, so there's nothing really to interfere with the radio.
No, I mean there's power lines on the side of the highway too, I guess, but every radio had that same interference if there was any, right? So
the thing that I've kind of discovered from now, representing a radio brand, and I understand you're a Jetty guy, and we're FRSKY guys, but typically, yeah, Anthony, we're FRSKY guys. Yeah, baby.
I've been outed. No, I'm a FRSKY guy.
Yeah, here we go. Essentially, what happens is it's kind of like, it's fitting that Anthony's wearing a New York Yankees hat because radio brands are kind of like baseball teams or football teams or something like that. It's just your team. But the thing that I've learned about it is it's more than that, because it's almost like every single time you buy a plane, not only are you have to be on the side of the radio company, but every time you build a new plane, you have to reinvest in the brand. So you have to reinforce your decision to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So to go direct jugular after, people like, oh, that company sucks, or the radio is horrible, or whatever, they're going to get defensive because, that's the whole thing. And I think what you did unknowingly is you opened Pandora's box, because you exposed a lot of the weaknesses. Essentially, not talking about any brand in particular, but 900 megahertz just penetrates better. And that's the whole.
I was quite surprised. So I think, you guys did really well, and Radio Master did well, and it was because of the 900 megahertz, I'm assuming, and it was pretty cool to see how that actually works, right? So it was a good learning experience for me as well too, and the other guys that helped me do the test. It was pretty neat.
Right.
So you had what, the FRSKY radio was I think I commented on your video. It was what, 25 milliwatts only?
Yeah, we so Randy, the guy that I got the radio from, he set up a receiver combination or whatever it was, and he just put it to 25. Was the setting that he put it to, and he said that's kind of what the normal is. I never played with it to go any further, so yeah, we just kept it there.
what was interesting is that you had 2 receivers that you tested. And so there's a couple things I took notes because I watched your video. I did go back and watch it from start to finish. So number one, the first receiver you worked with was the X8R, which is, I'm estimating a 10-year-old receiver.
Oh, okay.
Maybe a little bit older than that.
Yeah, I think older than that.
Oh, wow.
ACCST, yeah, really old technology on that one.
Yeah.
But it's a workhorse. There's a religious following with that receiver. People love that thing. And so, yeah, and it was, I'm really surprised that you were able to get it. It was like 5 kilometers out with that thing. Yeah. It was insane. And there was a pointed dip down when you got the road dip, but it did extremely well. And that thing's been updated. I think we're on our 3rd version. It's called the R8 right now. Archer Plus R8. Anyways, it was great to see that because 2.4 gigahertz, you know, we were up against other brands that were 2.4 gigahertz only as well. And that one did exceptionally well, you know, which makes me feel great. The other thing that I've noticed was we had the TDR18 was the other one you used. Yeah. Okay. Oh, the thing I was going to mention also is that we didn't loan you a radio. And the common philosophy is like, you know, those people that go to the supermarket and they're looking for like the milk, the expiration date of some milk, and they're always looking in the back to see if there's like 1 or 2 days more they can get out of it. They're like people who might believe that we actually can make a transmitter that can go, you know, 5 times further than most other transmitters or something like that. We would polish something up, make it perfect. No, you actually got a transmitter and receiver combination from a dude that you know. Exactly. So this was, so that to me is more telling of what we're about than if we were to give you something and you were to do it, because this is what's out in the general population right now. Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Yeah. Ben brought that up. He works at FRSKY too.
I think to FRSKY's point too, to Steve's point, and yes, I am a fan of FRSKY, but I don't know what the cost of those other receivers are, but that X8R receiver you're using, that's a $30 receiver. Actually, you can buy it cheaper sometimes. It's a $25 receiver. So it's
25 to 35, something like that.
Right, in that range. And the TD is not an expensive receiver either. What is that, a $45 receiver, $50 receiver?
Well, you have the TDR6, which is 40. So 6 channels 40, 10 channels 60, 18 channels 105.
Right. So it's far. I don't know what the cost. I know the Jetty stuff is a little bit costly. They they make good stuff, but it's a little expensive as far as my concern is. That's just my opinion, so I don't get yelled at in the comments. But I don't know what the other receivers are. But you know, when you consider that a 10-year-old receiver that cost $30 went that far, I mean, it's pretty good. I use that receiver. I probably have that receiver. I still have a couple of them, brand new in bags. I put that receiver in my park flyer planes. I have a couple planes that I can just go to the school that's right by my house that I know I'm not going to fly far because there's houses all over the place, but it's got a big enough field that I can fly. That's what I put that receiver in. I put that in those planes, and it's rock solid. I have no issues with it.
It's kind of neat during the test too, and you can kind of see this in the video. But when you're there, like actually in the vehicle driving, so we had the initial about half a kilometer dip in the road. Which was fine. I mean, some radios lost it, some didn't, most recovered, some didn't. But then when we start going up the big hill, I mean, our elevation gain there was about 300 to 400 feet up that hill. So it was actually a pretty steep hill because everybody said, well, you're on flat ground for 5 kilometers. That's not fair. Well, no, we were actually climbing about 400 feet by the end of the hill. But when you get to that, I think it was like around a 5 kilometer mark, there was actually a dip in the road. And you started to go down the other side and you lose sight of the home base, we called it, right? So to actually go to that 5.4 mark, you were on the other side of dirt, essentially. It was pretty neat.
Yeah. So well, that's cool. And I saw some of the comments about the flat ground and to be honest with you, and once again, my opinion, and I don't know, Steve, you could back me up on this or not, I think that's almost a fairer test than being way up in the air, right? Because if you're whatever 400 feet in the air and you have that straight line of sight to the home base, there's nothing blocking it, right? At least if you're at ground level, there's cars, there's trees, there's stuff on the ground level, right, that can cause interference.
What you're going to find is when you get at an altitude, you're going to get better radio reception.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, but the thing is that what we're looking at is the ability to penetrate and go around. And that was some of the things that happened if you were to pump up the wattage. Like we were up against Radio Master. Radio Master was 10 times more power than we were. So they did well, but when you think about it, in reality, every time that you have to go 4 times the power to get double the distance.
Okay.
So at 100 milliwatts, they should have gone twice as far as we went.
Yeah.
At 200 milliwatts, they should have gone 4 times further than we were at. Yeah. And so they should have been at least 5 times further. And so they made it to about 6 kilometers, I believe. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting, when you back the power down, and the 2 different modules, you had different radios. Yeah. The radios they were both running YellowRS, and essentially they were very similar type of modules in both of those. And when you put the power back down, you saw it didn't do as well at 25 milliwatts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So and that has more to do because they were at 2.4 gigahertz. They have a 2.4 gigahertz LoRa. When you get to 900 megahertz, it really just penetrates better all the way around. And, a lot of people are going to sit here and say, well, I don't care. I'm not going to fly 5 miles away or whatever it's going to be. But the point is like, if you're a guy who, for whatever reason, you lose sight of the plane, you bring it down, and you're like, right before it crashed on the ground, you want to take it back. Oh, I see it's over there. And you want to be able to get the plane back. Or I was at a flying event a couple weeks ago, or about a month ago, and someone was flying gorgeous. It was like a pits behind a tree, and even with that really famous brand, he lost control of the plane because he was up only about 40 feet off the ground, and he had a blockout for like a half a second, and that half a second he was down. So that's why. Go ahead.
One of the questions that just popped into my head was, so with FRSKY, so you are you guys always transmitting on 2.4 and 900 is the backup? Is it using both? Can you decide which you're using?
I'm glad you brought that up because you're a Jetty guy, right? So we can talk about that. As far as I understand it, Jetty has dual 2.4 gigahertz receivers that are different frequencies or different sides of the band.
Yeah.
So essentially what happens, and when that fails safes, it goes to 900 megahertz.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What we do is we actually transmit about 2.4 gigahertz and 900 megahertz at the same time.
Oh, okay.
And we prefer, it's in the same package. And as far as the receiver, it has both receivers in one receiver package. So it's essentially a 2-in-1 module, because it has 2.4 gigahertz and 900 megahertz. So it never fails safe. What happens is when it sees the packets start to drop, it goes from, it says, well, my packets are going away here, and I see a lot of good packets at 900 megahertz. We're going to go over here.
Yeah.
But the thing that's really cool about this is that you'll never know when it goes to 900 megahertz, because
it's just in the background doing its thing, basically.
Right. Yeah, and it feels the same. It's not like you lose resolution in the sticks.
Yeah. Okay.
So
interesting.
That's why I think it's the best protocol out there, as far as just the best receiver setup. And it was really, I think this test was, even in my mind, it was kind of somebody about a year ago put a video out, and he was like, "Oh, this is not going to work, and the receivers are going to step over each other. You're not going to get distance, blah blah blah." No, you will. And the other thing I noticed about the video was, like, we had the test and we had one receiver and for each one of these, and we're up against, I remember your comment was when you got the Jetty out, it was about halfway through the testing cycle, and you're like, okay, this is going to be rock solid. That was your comment. And what do you have? You have like a power box, and you have like 3 receivers hooked up to it, or something like that.
Yeah, so on the Jetty side of things, I had the standard receiver, and the standard receiver that I use is always the long antenna, 40 centimeter antenna with the dipole thing on it. I think I had a clone. I think we did it once with a clone. So the clone's basically it's supposed to give you more antenna diversity. And then I tested one of the little R3s, which has like the simple little antennas. And there was basically zero difference in that situation amongst all those different units. So it was actually really kind of opened my eyes to how with Jetty anyways, how whether I'm using an R3 or one of the fancy receivers, they're really working very similar.
Right. Yeah. That's pretty much
John, you got to have the newer FRSKY radio. What'd you do? X20 was the radio, X20S. What'd you have?
Yes. Yes.
It was an X20S. So you have a Jetty yourself, right? I think the new X20 or X20S is a well made, gorgeous radio. How does it feel?
That's the new one that just came out. Is that right?
That's the one you had for your test.
Oh, okay.
The new the Pro. I actually have a Pro here. I can.
The Pro is the one. Yeah, the Pro is the new one, right? That just came out with that.
Yeah.
How do you feel? I feel design wise, they're pretty similar, right? So, what did you think feeling the X20 compared to the Jetty?
Well, during the test, that was probably the most time I've ever spent with a Jetty radio. Like I've seen them before at events and stuff, and held them for like 3 seconds, and that's about it. But that was the most time when Randy gave me his radio to play with. Yeah, the most time I've ever spent with one. It feels good. Yeah, that's the new one. That's right. Cool.
This is Pro, yeah.
For me, the only thing, and I don't want to come across as negative, the only thing I don't like, and part of it's because my lack of digits, is just the height of the radio being the overall length of it.
Gotcha.
So for me, I find it a little bit short in the length, so top to bottom of radio.
So you said Jetty. I think you were meant to say FRSKY. That was as long as you've had an FRSKY radio in your hand. You said Jetty.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
I just don't want you to get any more heat because I know you get a lot of heat on
No kidding, eh?
on these topics. So I want to clarify that. So
yeah,
it's the FRSKY is longer then. It's a bigger radio.
No, it's a shorter radio than the Jetty radio is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see.
Quality wise, though, it stacks up, right? I mean, so Jetty's like one of those things that like I've
This is rock solid. Yeah, this one right here, beautiful. This is the Pro. Yeah, metal aluminum face, amazing. Yeah.
Looks like metal gimbals too.
Yeah.
I'm an FRSKY guy, but Jetty is one of those things that I see a lot of people. I'm sorry, Steve, but I see a lot of people ranting and raving about them. There's a whole hashtag Jetty cult. Like there's a whole big following of Jetty, and I've thought about it. Like, what's up with this radio? What's so special about it? So it's talking to somebody who's had the ability to have kind of both of them in their hands and compare them. That's kind of where I'm going with that.
Yeah, it's. I mean, right. And Steve really touched on this earlier. Like any radio is good, right? Like, and honestly, if I wasn't flying Jetty, I used to be a JR team member, and left JR, and I started paying full price for all my Jetty stuff. If I wasn't flying Jetty, I would probably be flying Powerbox. Well, maybe not now, but after all the heat. But but any radio is good. Right, like really, when it comes down to it, pick a radio that you like and that feels good and use it.
So you like these premium brands, then the Powerbox and the Powerbox.
I'm just used to it. Yeah, I mean, it's I like my JR stuff. I was a JR guy for a long time, and had a bit of an issue with one of their hardware pieces, and wasn't very happy with some of the communication that went on. So. And the right time was presented to me to get a Jetty radio, so that's what I ended up with. So there wasn't a whole lot of experimentation with other radio brands when I made that decision, so it just kind of fell into my lap.
I've never had any experience with the JR, but I remember watching one of your older videos, John, where you were setting up a plane with a JR radio, and I remember the JR. it looked really easy to kind of set up and go in on each channel and kind of set it to servos and like.
Yeah, well, the
very
thing about the JR
customizable.
stuff, the thing about the JR stuff is if you've been in the hobby for a long time and you've flown old JR and you've flown Spectrum, the JR stuff was basically just a continuation of that thinking. So when I moved to Jetty, it was actually a huge learning curve, but my friend David really helped me out with that, and it's a huge step to go to a different radio manufacturer. Just like using Futaba, when I've set planes up on Futaba radios, I mean, it's just like mind blowing sometimes how to figure some of this stuff out when you're not a Futaba guy, right?
Right.
Because everything's, your channels are backwards, your throttle has to be reversed. It's a little bit different. So
yeah.
That's interesting. But so what is it about Powerbox that draws you to them?
I've had good exposure to their products for a long time. So I've been like even when I was using JR radios, I was using Powerbox gyros since 2013, since the very first one came out. I love their wire. I wasn't I'm not a huge fan of the layout of their radio, but they build quality stuff as far as I know. So
I was looking at that was the one thing you didn't get into, was actually playing with the radio and looking at how the firmware goes together. So I'm redoing the list of videos that we give to people when they're looking at a radio system or when they first get the radio. And some of the Powerbox stuff came up, and so I started watching some of their videos and kind of see how they do things. And it's really, I don't know, it's like, if you were, I'm not knocking the Powerbox at all, but it's kind of like you have to go to this screen to do this, and you have to go to this next screen to do this, and so you have to back out of here, go back to the main menu, go to this other screen over here to do this. Yeah. And in FRSKY, everything is, once you get in the mixer, everything about the other one, including the channels you select, are on one screen.
Right.
And it is, I think it's like a lot more intuitive. It's a lot better once you understand it. I was looking at the Powerbox stuff, and I was thinking, I would be able to figure my way around here after a while, but this is so much faster, to fly through it. There's a lot I do like about the Powerbox system. It's a nice looking radio. Yeah. But I don't know. I believe
it comes from correct me if I'm wrong, but the Wheatronics background, I think.
Wheatronics, right?
Yeah, is where it's from. So.
Yeah, it was some guy who created that. I actually knew the USA distributors for the Wheatronics. A couple guys who were trying to sell it. And oops, 1 second.
Hopefully, you didn't drop your radio.
No. There we go.
It's a display model now.
You hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I figured I would be able to work my way around inside the radio system, inside of the Powerbox system, and learn it. But it just, everything now is kind of very intuitive when it comes to, you want something that kind of makes sense, so you can kind of move yourself around and easily move around. And a lot of times what we're dealing with is, I don't know. Well, there's a couple of things we're up against. So on one end, we have the guys who fly the turbine jets. And when I first showed up with these FRSKY radios, or plastic radios for $459, and they're like, "Get out of here, kid! You're bothering me." Oh, is that Chinese radio? Hey, yeah, that's really, And then you go to the event again a year later, and the guys are like, "Yeah, I still not going to buy your radio, but all my friends have them, and I think they're actually kind of cool. So show me how to do this," or like, I'm the local expert in my club, and I have to figure out how to work on your radio system. So there's a lot more of that. The reason why we came up with this radio, which is $995 for the Pro, is because we had people literally told us in the jet community, "I know that it's a great radio system, but something about it, I just can't pay under $500 when I put a plane up that costs $30,000. And there's that mentality. Getting over that is kind of, but realistically, it's not like we started doing this like 2 weeks ago. We've been doing radio's signal well for since 2010, so it's about 14 years.
Yeah, and that mentality, I do understand that mentality. I actually got an email today from a fellow, and it was basically, I'm building I built a Strega a few months ago, which has the Colm engine, beautiful plane and everything. He's building the same plane, and he said, the servos you recommended in your build videos, or that you're using in your build videos, I'm not recommending anything, but he's like, those are really expensive. Can I go with a cheaper servo? I haven't replied to him yet, but my thinking was when I read that email was, I've never gone for a flight and wished that I was using less expensive or less powerful servos in my aircraft.
Right.
So, that I don't know what you would call that mentality, but I do understand that mentality. Like, I don't mind paying $200 a servo. I don't mind paying thousands of dollars for a radio system, and I think a lot of the jet guys feel the same way. So
that's the cost of one of my airframes that you're paying for one servo. Just so you know.
The one thing I will say about that is that when you look at the cost of what a radio system, because it's not just the cost of the radio, it's $1,000 every time you make a new point for the electronic.
For sure.
Or we could do it for under $300. And then 5-6 years ago, when we had a different political administration down here, and we had in the United States, and the economy was going gangbusters, and your portfolio was going well, taking $3,000 out of the portfolio to buy a transmitter, that's something that was doable.
Yeah.
But now that we have $16 big trips to McDonald's for lunch, it's a different world now,
Yeah, for sure. Agreed. Absolutely.
And then the other thing is like what we're looking at is trying to get people in from the hobby side, who are coming in. What happened was people would go to the hobby store, they would buy the blue boxes of the Horizon hobby, and they go through the whole thing. I think the one place that Horizon kind of screwed up a bit was they started selling EDFs, because once you get into an EDF, then all of a sudden you're addicted to jets.
Yeah.
And then I've seen it myself where people will start off at EDF and then they work into turbine jets.
Yeah.
So my philosophy is we can work with them at when they're getting into starting to get into EDF jets. Here's something where you can buy a radio system, and then 5 years from now, you're not going to have to get rid of the radio system to buy something else.
Yeah, that's a good point for sure.
Yeah, that works. Steve, you say we a lot. You're a proud FRSKY employee, huh?
Yes. Yeah.
I was noticing that. So I was curious about that. That was actually one of the questions I had. How did you go from being an I? How did you end up at FRSKY? Like, did you have experience in this hobby as an employee in the hobby prior to this, or is this like your first time actually working for a company that's in the hobby?
It's my first time working for a company in the hobby.
Wow.
And essentially what I've had in the background is I've had sales experience. I graduated in college. I went to work for Fortune 500 companies doing sales. And I remember I had one guy, it's kind of everything's a relationship with me. So I had a time when I was getting married, and the company I'm working for, they said, we're not sure when we're going to fire you, either before you get married or after we get married. So we're going to fire you before you get married.
Wow.
F you. I mean,
wow.
I hope these guys are burning in hell. I mean, I'm not, no hard feelings. Yeah, but so I called my friend up, really close friend, and he said, oh yeah, I'm working at a great company. We're looking for somebody, and my boss is going to love you. You're going to love my boss. And I remember I got hired, and I went to his house, and he got out. This was like early 1990s. He gets out this little laptop, and it had 2 floppy disks, and he gets out this dot matrix print. So it was like 10 minutes watching him set the whole thing up, get the perforated paper in there and everything. And then he had this whole list of like, here's the syllabus of what I'm going to teach you. And so he prints out the first page, and like, I'm writing a book on salesmanship. And he prints out the first page, and he said, that's all I got.
Wow.
And I took it home and I kept it. And when I was moving, like 5 years later into the house we live in now, I found the piece of paper and I'm like, oh my God, we went over everything on this list. And so, everything about relationships and all these things that he talked about. And essentially, what I was able to do when I came into FRSKY was I had this background of being able to start things and figure out how to get things going. And literally the first year, probably like I say 3 or 4 months into the job, the manager he said to me, well, this is 2023, no, 2022. He said, the pandemic was horrible for us. We thought 2021 would be better. It wasn't. And we thought this year would definitely be better. It's not. And we're not anticipating next year is going to be better. So, we're just going to have to write this out. It was just what he said. And, it's kind of like you feel the way I felt about FRSKY is the way you feel about it. It's something, it's like, yeah, this is something I think people develop affinities towards the radio systems because it's something that they use. And the transmitter is something to hold on to in their hands. And then as you get into the hobby deeper, you understand, like, this is the thing that's keeping me in the sky.
Yeah.
This is me. Either I can take the plane home this afternoon and go do something else, or I can take it home in a trash bag and then be depressed and go through setting this thing up all, spending another 2 to 3 months getting it set up again. And then you start to understand, like, you really want a better radio system. Mm-hmm. So what I was able to do, I came in and like the first 2 or 3 months, I was trying to figure out what could we do to turn things around here. And, I was trying to figure out, do we deal with vloggers? Do we deal with this? Do we deal with that? And then somebody made the comment. It was just like, yeah, people like the radio when they touch it. I'm like, that's interesting. So that was my whole philosophy. Let's get out and meet people and put the radio into people's hands and start talking to people. And that was pretty much it. From start to finish, just going out, spending as much time as possible, giving up weekends, I did crazy things. I would give out my business card and say, here's my cell phone, here's my email address, call me. And then what people would do was, like, I remember my first big trip, I came back from it, and after a couple of weeks, people weren't calling, and I was like getting bummed. I'm like, oh, they didn't get the radio. This is horrible. And this is, something's going wrong. And then I started getting phone calls. It's like, yeah, my friend has the radio. He really likes it. I want one too. So that's the whole sales pitch. I mean, we have not really done anything really brilliant other than put it in people's hands and go out and let people have a good experience with the radio system. And there's a lot of people who really identify with the transmitters. Yeah. And they've got to know the whole universe of what FRSKY is offering. And they're going out and they're telling their friends about it as well. So this is really kind of a word of mouth type of thing.
Yeah. There's been some drama with FRS. I don't know if we can talk about that or not, though. But there was some drama with it's something about radios and drama because, John, you had yours when you had your video, but Steve, you had a little bit of drama too, right? With the LRS and FRSKY. I remember that whole debacle.
Yeah, well, I mean, the LRS people, they're very enthusiastic about their brand. I mean, everyone is, and that's I can kind of understand where they're coming from being a guy who championed a open source community myself.
Right, so right.
They're trying to do what they can, and they've come a long way in a very short period of time. It's just great. Yes. But essentially what happened was, if you were starting to look at it, I mean, FRSKY was kind of when it started off. John, you've been doing this since about 2010? Yeah,
2009.
Okay. So you might remember FRSKY, we had those like V-Series 8-channel receivers, and what we had were just the JR bay. You put our transmit, VJT. There was eventually XJT module in the back of the transmitter that you have like a JR or something like that. So we had this really great transmitter and great receiver combination. And then when it came time to we need to make our own transmitter now. And so we actually bought the mold from JR for one of their popular yeah, so it was the first time they went out of business. We bought there. And it was kind of like $150 transmitter, but it did S-Bus. And because it did S-Bus, it was able to talk to, about that point, 16 channels. And the drone guys picked up on it. And it became the Tyrannus X9D, which was the quintessential drone radio. Yeah.
It was standard.
It was this, yeah, it was the standard. I mean, literally, people love that radio. It's just a fabulous radio. And actually now with our Archer receivers, the new Archer Plus, you can actually still bind with those really old, as long as you update it to ACCST version 2 to the transmitter. These old transmitters still work with the new receivers that we have, and they work with Access and they work with the ACCST. So it's kind of nice. We're always looking out for that. But I think what happened was, like a gazillion years ago, we had, I don't know, it was what it would look like to me, because I'm trying to piece it together from the information I'm getting told, and calculating it. And what was interesting was I was able, before I started working with the company, I figured out who's running the company. I said, this guy's an engineer. And I'm like, and then one day I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh my son of a bitch, I was right. So yeah. Essentially what happened was these guys just had explosive growth because the drone market took off and just went going gangbusters. And there was a number of years where it just got better and better because the flight controllers didn't used to have, you had to put something else on if you wanted to get video. So we had, so then all of a sudden the flight controllers had video built into it. And there was a number of years that I think till about 2017, 2018, the trajectory just kept going up and up. And every couple miles, you're driving through a big town, every couple miles you see a drone store, in a strip mall somewhere.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that whole drone, phase kind of peaked at some point, and then all those drone stores are now vape shops, and just kind of how the hobby, it just worked. But we caught the wave big. The problem was that essentially when you're growing the way, and I've done this before, I've started my own business and I know exactly what it's like. When you get to this explosive growth phase, you just are fighting like hell to keep up and get the orders out and keep people happy and stuff like that. And the company wasn't innovating as fast as it should have, and it wasn't listening to the customers as fast as it should have. So, when things fell apart, when we're talking about, I wouldn't say fall apart, but what I will say about the drone community, from everybody that I've talked to, all the different hobby stores, all the ones who said we used to sell drones, but we don't anymore. They always have the same story. We would bring in, they wanted the red motors, we brought them in, and then the next week they wanted blue motors, and they didn't want the red motors anymore. We couldn't sell them anymore. And so when it came to FRSKY, we were the only game in town, and then we had some competitors that had almost remarkably very similar radios to what we're offering, and as far as they look really similar on the inside to some of our radios. And, I won't talk about how that all went down, but essentially, I think what it was, this was a company that went up and then saw oh my gosh, things are going horrible. And we're seeing disaster because of some events that transpired. And then the drone community kind of FRSKY was it, and then it was Crossfire. Now it's ELRS. So every couple of years they go through a different phase, 2 or 3 years. I don't know if ELRS is going to keep going for the next 3 to 5 years as far as being the preferred one. I do know that there's really not a closed source system that goes up against ELRS in the drone community as of right now. I mean, Crossfire
is your guys' business, is it, as far as the split goes from, I guess, the drone community, FPV type stuff to fixed wing jets, things like that, is there a fairly even split amongst audience?
No, we've moved out of the drone community pretty much.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, what it was this whole radio system that you're looking at was essentially, this was a gamble. This was a bet, because what they had, we looked at the microcontroller that put inside the transmitters. Uses the H7 microcontroller. The code base is different from all the other microcontrollers that go up to it. So that's why people ask it, can you put ELRS on? No, we don't have the code base, and they haven't written the code base for a while. I mean, yes, you can use ELRS. We put the module in the back of one of our transmitters. It works fine.
Yeah.
But the question they ask is, can you put Edge TX on there? And the answer is no, because that code base has not been updated to work with these new microcontrollers. So this was a huge financial investment and a huge undertaking for the company to go from what it looked at the plane community as, here's a community, we're coming from a community where, it's things are hot and then things are not, to community where people will buy a transmitter and they'll keep it for 10 years and they just love it. And then the next transmitter is the same company as the last one they bought.
Yeah.
And that was like, that looks like a fantastic community to be in.
It seems like, John, to your point and to your question, it seems like with ELRS and all that stuff, with the FPV drone community and that community, it almost seems like there's almost like a race to the bottom with controllers, right? Because you can get a capable controller that will fly an FPV drone now for under $100. That'll do it, and it'll have ELRS on it, right?
Yeah.
And I just actually had this conversation and argument with one of my friends the other day, who's trying to get me to convert over to ELRS. And I know ELRS, the actual protocol works great, right? The technology behind it is good, right? They're getting long range out of this thing. My big thing is, I don't have expensive planes per se, but some of my planes can be $500, $700, $1,000 for one of my planes, right? And I know that FRSKY, right, has been making receivers for a long time for fixed wing and for planes, and I know that I've never had a brownout issue with one of their receivers. I've never had, a servo spike and take out the receiver. I've never had any of those issues. Yeah. And ELRS now is starting to make PWM receivers, right? But it's like, they're not really, they're the drone guys, kind of. And I'm going to kick all kinds of heat for saying all this in the comments.
Well, I know. The thing is that the guys who fly drones, they hook up their drones to their computers.
Right.
Flight controllers together. So, updating a receiver at the same time is not a big deal.
Right. Yeah. And there's no load really on the receiver.
Plane guys would hate to do that. I mean, this is the whole idea of, Flex Innovation makes great planes. The Aura 8, you have to hook up to a computer to update it. And that really, I think, sets them back a bit, because people just don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So, I think it's interesting. I mean, ELRS, the guys are very passionate, and they seem like they run a tight ship there, which I do respect. And they really, we looked at coming out with ELRS related products ourselves, but the reality is like most of this is they're well taken care of by now. They have a lot of options, and for us to be another option, there's two things that really, when I look at as far as, and that was one of the reasons why we went to like locking down a protocol so that people can't steal it anymore.
Yeah.
Was because people were stealing it and they're crashing the planes, and then they're sending the receivers in screaming at us, "This is a piece of junk." What we open it up, we get like, wait a minute, this is not even ours. Right. I always have on it. And so there's the experience, and I don't know. I think quad guys, there's a bit more of, they're kind of more about experimentation. They're always the race quad. They want something that goes a little faster, does a little bit more, and they're willing. A lot of these guys are kids, so they're doing things on shoestring budgets. So that's why these radios cost under $100. Some of them are like $55 now. they're really designed to go after, and we kind of want to see that because these are people. There's nothing but good things that happen when you sit down and apply yourself to something like that.
Right.
And if you want to apply yourself to ELRS, more power to you. But the guys who fly planes have a different mindset.
Yeah.
And that is, they kind of understand that they want something that's going to bring their plane back.
Right.
Yeah.
All the time. And they don't want to risk having something that potentially does it. And one of the things I've always thought about when I look at the open source community is like, you have an open source for your receivers. And what happens is you come out, how much does it cost to make a receiver? We're going to sell this for $19.95. Well, if you're a competitor, you're going to say, well, this company is selling millions of these units and they're $19.95. I got it. We're going to come out with one that's $18.95. And then what happens is it's kind of, then that takes off. But, a lot of times you're starting to cut corners when you do that. So when you talk to the guys who really understand ELRS well, they always tell you two things. First of all, they have a formula of all the things that work well for them. And second of all is they buy the more expensive stuff. So there's really no cost savings by the time you're done.
I'm starting to see a huge transition. I'm even starting to see a transition, John, into the turbine stuff because, like I said, I'm in a lot of groups on Facebook and stuff like that. And I'm starting to see a big transition from people going from FPV quads to fixed wing to then, like, even in the INAV group itself, like I see people who will take a typical INAV plane. Now, John, I don't know if you know what an INAV plane, typical INAV plane would look like. So I'll grab one for you. Hold on.
Perfect.
I'll bring down an oldie but goodie.
An AR 900.
Yeah. So this is a Sonic model AR wing, and this is your typical FPV wing here.
That's a fun wing.
Yeah, it's a great wing. Great wing,
$50 buys you a lot of fun.
And I got that tape on the front edge for landing, and this one's actually one of the planes that's actually in repair. But there you go. There's the electronics and stuff, right? That's where my flight controller and stuff is.
Yeah.
So what I'm starting to see is a lot of people going from quadcopters to fixed wings, right? And even Hobby King now is selling these now for, I think the kit's like $70 or whatever it is. Hobby King selling these for.
Yeah.
So Hobby King's starting to see it, right?
Yeah.
So you're seeing people go from the FPV quads and drones to fixed wing. And then, like I did, I went from DJI drones to, I can't stand that company, and I'll say that openly. I went from DJI drones to FPV drones to then fixed wings, which I used to do balsa wings way back in the day with my dad, which those are traumatic stories. I don't like talking about them. But now I'm seeing people go from kind of what I do, going from, putting this stuff on the regular traditional FPV wings to, I'm going to put an INAV flight controller and an EDF jet with full INAV and FPV setup, to those people are now starting to put turbines in foam jets. And then from the foam jets, they're, all of a sudden they're starting to buy into the bigger turbines. So it's a natural progression. So I think, like Steve was saying, I think it's great that people, especially kids, right? We need more youth in the hobby, and then the AMA is failing at that part of it totally.
Yeah.
A lot of the attitude at the flying fields and stuff isn't really embracing FPV as much as they should have or should, because that's where a lot of the kids want to be. They want to fly FPV and they want to get into the hobby and build their own race drone and then go, from that progression into wings and stuff. So I'm seeing a lot of it. I'm seeing a lot more people, especially in the groups. Hey, this is my first plane. Hey, I'm having a hard time launch this. Hey, how do I set this up? And then going into the foamies, then going into foamy turbines. And then, eventually at some point I will get a turbine at some point in my life.
We're still working on you.
Yeah, no, I'm down. Listen, I'm all about it. It's
let me rephrase that. We're working on your wife still.
Right. It's that, and I need a place to fly it. There's not too many places to fly a turbine on Long Island that I won't get arrested by the FAA. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I get called in for flying a missile over people's houses. It's not going to go good. Not at all.
Nice.
But yeah, I think it's all good. I think everything pushes everything forward. We need more people in the hobby, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the main thing that I've worked on too. Is just kind of
Right.
the idea that we can. Um, I'm kind of coming to the reality of how things work these days.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, we're talking about rewriting manuals, and I said we can rewrite manuals all you want, but only about 10% of the people will read them.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and if what I'm doing now is writing documents, and like when I get to complex stuff, I say, "Here's a link to the video."
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and that's kind of how it goes. And oops,
You have to now. It's
there we
people
go.
don't learn the way they used to, right?
No.
Everybody goes to Google. They want to look at a video, read if they're going to look at a document, it's going to be on their computer. I do it all the time.
So what we're doing now is we're trying to. What I'm coming to the realization is that we want to bring people into the hobby, but we want them to succeed. And, and the other thing I'm looking at too is I want them to eventually build, because once you start building, I mean, you talk to turbine jet pilots. I mean, you talk about turbines. That's like we're doing the 60 size, or we're doing the 80s. Something small. I got a 120 in that one. 160? Are you kidding me? Yeah, they're insane. And then and what we're trying to do is and you see that in the scale side too, like the Warbird guys. They have like these 4-stroke motors that are just insane, and some of them have these radial motors which are just amazing. So you want people to kind of like embrace the hobby and build and kind of get out of the hobby store mentality. It's great. The whole idea of we'll get you flying, get some cheap planes, cheap foam planes crashing, but eventually you're going to get better, and you want to move up in the hobby. And so that's kind of like I'm seeing this all across the board. I mean, even the drone hobby was like that at one point. It was a build it kind of hobby, but the drones started to get so much smaller, and now all of a sudden the drones are starting to get bigger again.
Right.
So you can actually work on them and put your own flight controllers in there and stuff like that. And that's kind of where we're at as far as we're trying to. What I'm trying to do is help people out. I mean, the firmware, if the people apply themselves, and I'm really clear with people when we talk about the radio, you have to apply yourself. This is not going to be intuitive, but I'm going to use some videos. If you sit down and you can watch them, you can figure your way through this. And then if you keep going with this, we're going to show you some stuff that's going to blow your mind. And then we could talk about, essentially one of my planes, I have it set up so that when I take off, it has a takeoff mode. But when I get to a certain altitude where I feel comfortable, all I do is push the elevator forward, push the nose down, and all of a sudden it jumps from one flight mode to the next flight mode using logical conditions.
Wow.
And those are the kind of things that we have videos for that, where you can kind of learn how to do those types of things. And I'm thinking, what my hope is that people embrace it. What I've discovered is that a lot of these planes I thought were lousy or crappy or whatever just weren't really set up well. And you can kind of go back in there and you can really tweak these things down, learn how to change your rates and give it a little bit more expo. And all of a sudden, oh my God, this is a much better plane than I ever thought it was.
Yeah.
So, Steve, has FRSKY had any over the past couple of years any supply issues? Because from our side, I see a lot of our common electronics that we use on the turbine side. There's a couple manufacturers that have really struggled to keep up with demand. Do you guys have any issues like that?
Yeah, we had essentially a lot of during the pandemic. The big issue that happened was, I think a number of suppliers who supplied electronics, they just had brands, as demand was going through the roof, they're like, well, we don't need this other crap that we've been selling for a while. So they got rid of a lot of things. Unfortunately, we had this line of receivers, the Archer line of receivers that came out, and like half of them we couldn't get parts for anymore. Okay. So we had to buy a ton of parts just to keep it going long enough so we can redesign the Archer line. But every time they redesigned everything, it got better because the Archer Plus line now actually goes back and handles ACCST. So you can literally get an old X9D transmitter and put the right ACCST version 2 on it, fly, so you can buy one of these things used for $50 and fly with one of our 12 channel stabilized receivers with that. And then sooner or later, when you transition into a nicer radio system like a Tandem, you can use the same receivers. It's not like you're getting rid of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was one of the reasons why I got the Tandem, because I have one of the things I consider with even like FPV gear, because a lot of my planes are still on analog, and I'm still putting analog on planes, and I have some digital setups. But one of the things you have to consider is if you have 20, 30 planes and you buy a new radio, you want that radio to work, because now you're looking at $30, $40, $50 per plane to update it, right? So it's like, it's another argument I have all the time is, digital's great. The digital video feed's great. I'm not knocking it, but at 200-300 feet in the air, a really good analog setup, I have nice clear video. Like, I'm not diving through trees. Like, I'll take heat for that in the comments as well. But I have HD0. I've flown with DJI. I will not spend $1 of my money on DJI stuff, and that's just my own personal thing. And it's just because, when I first started out in the drone industry, I actually did commercial work, and I was on an actual production set. And after doing all of the hoops and jumping through all of the hoops of getting the thing to be able to take off, it still wouldn't take off. And I ended up basically getting thrown off the set. You have a film crew there, there's an actor there. And I did the FAA authorization, did the DJI thing. I did everything that I was supposed to do, and the thing still would not take off because of where we were. And I had all the proper authorization. And now
here's a question for you guys. This is related but totally unrelated. What protocol does DJI use?
They have their own protocol.
Yeah.
Okay.
They developed their own protocol, and I mean,
it's made by Qualcomm.
Huh. But okay. I on one of their drones. So the what is it? The latency on like their regular drones is you can't do anything super like crazy with it because of the latency on their regular drones, right? But I've flown back in the day a DJI Mavic right out of the box. I've flown it 3 or 4 miles, no issues, like crazy. Video feed, signal, like the whole thing. So the technology is great. I mean, in all honesty, DJI, they're the godfathers of the hobby flight controller, basically. In all honesty,
they've taken out the drone market for the most part. We see John Farwell doing videos about DJI products. It's kind of like, that's they've got their place in the drone community.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. John, we were talking about turbine sizes before and motor sizes, and then Steve was talking about the different sizes. What's the biggest turbine you have? What's the biggest you've put in one of your planes?
And the biggest that we would normally put in a normal plane would be a 300 Newton turbine. So the 300 Newton turbine, like the F-16 Venom I just finished, that has a 300 Newton turbine in it. So that's basically 30 kilograms times 2.2, so 66 pounds of thrust. It's a big engine. We did get a 400 Newton turbine last week so it's a Sweewind 400. That turbine is going in a UAV. It's a special project. I can't say much about it, but we'll be doing it here. We'll be doing it here at the shop, and it'll be behind the scenes, basically. No videos on it. So
I understand that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, but those are kind of the biggest. Like the 400 is the biggest hobby turbine, I guess. So the 400 would have 88 pounds of thrust.
So speed wise, what is it 300 like in that F-16? How fast is that jet?
The F-16 will move pretty good. Like you're probably about 250, 280 miles an hour.
Wow.
for you guys. Yeah. Like this UAV that we're putting together, the specs basically, it's going to cruise at 250 knots is what it's going to cruise at. So
Each flight can cost them like about $25 for fuel.
Well, I was just going to ask that. What is the flight time for something like that? Like, I know.
So it's I think the fuel tank that's coming in it is going to be 22 liters.
Jeez.
So flight time is about 60 minutes ish, of course,
Okay.
depending on how you're flying. But it's going to, I mean, if you think about just fuel costs alone, you're about $60 in fuel every flight.
Wow.
So yeah.
It's insane.
What about one of your typical, like one of your jets? What's an average flight time for?
About 7-8 minutes is pretty normal. I mean,
Okay.
give or take a couple minutes on each side, right? Depending on the setup. So, but 7 minutes, 8 minutes is pretty typical for us.
Yeah, and that's with like moderate throttle control, not just wide open, right?
Yeah. I mean, some of my planes, they can fly 10, 11, 12 minutes, but I only fill it up not full on the fuel tank. And
Okay.
I find for myself after like 8 minutes of flying, I'm done, right? Like I'm ready to land, and you've put all your focus into that flight, and at that point I'm just race tracking it around, and it's just getting boring, if that makes any sense. So,
no, I get it.
It's the takeoffs and landings which are exciting. Landings, takeoffs. Because
depending on the plane,
but landings.
Yeah, the landings they're quite the learning process for a lot of people. So.
Yeah.
We were talking about motors before, and you mentioned the Culm motor that you put on that video you did with the car. I mean, you could almost hang that motor on like a necklace and wear it. It's like a piece of jewelry. Like it's just gorgeous motor.
It showed up in September last year, and I think I had it sitting on my shop table right there, just in the center of the table for 3-4 months before we actually put it in the plane, and it was just beautiful, right? Just sitting in the middle of the table.
Did you see that?
I just felt like putting it under a glass case.
Which one is it?
He made a video. He built a bunch of videos actually. He built a car. So it's Strega P51 Mustang.
It's a Strega Reno Racer P51, wow. But it's got an inline Culm 3-cylinder 4-stroke 230 cc engine in it. It's just a monster.
230 cc. So
it's insane.
Yeah, there was like a motorcycle that in the 1960s that was 50 cc.
Yeah.
They sold millions of them.
Yeah.
It was a little Honda, like was the Monkey or one of those?
It's like a little dirt bike. I had one when I was younger.
Cub, yeah.
I had one as a kid.
Oh, the Monkey was the dirt bike. Yeah, so it was like 50 cc and then like 120 whatever. So these motors are basically motorcycle engines in there.
Yeah, well, they weigh like 19 pounds for the engine, right? So it's pretty crazy.
It's gorgeous, bro. It's a gorgeous. It's all like polished aluminum. It's just a piece of art. Like, what does one of those go for? That's got to be a couple $1,000. Right?
They're, I think, landed here in Canada in Canadian dollars. It ends up being like about $8,000, so like $6,000 US kind of thing. So
these insane motors. Yeah,
and they're basically they're all made to order, right? You order it, you pay for it, and then 3-4 months
the props,
later, your engine shows up.
You can go crazy with a custom prop for that thing, right? A carbon fiber.
Yeah, well, the prop for that Strega, it's like, so you get the hub, and then the blades are 4 carbon fiber blades. I mean, that whole assembly is about $800, so it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's nuts.
But she's a beauty. She's a lot of fun to fly.
Gorgeous plane. Gorgeous plane. Yeah. Yeah, it's a different world. It really is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's a complete different world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The one thing I can tell you, just in case you ever wondered what it was like, you're kind of asking about what it was like, how I got here, and then what it's like, the company. It's much smaller than I thought it was. That was the first thing. I thought it was like a huge corporation. No, I work for the owner. It's a family. And a Chinese family. They kind of migrated to the United States. So Dad called him Big Boss. He's in China for half the year, or he's out right now, but he comes out every once in a while. I could take you. I live in a community that's probably about 40% Asian, and I could put him in with a community like one of our community events. and you would have no idea who he was, the president of the corporation or big company. He was just blue jean t-shirt kind of guy. But I finally asked his son. His son is my boss, and I finally asked him, "Oh, does he have any hobbies?" And they said, "No, walking the dog. That's his only hobby." So the guy doesn't fly. He doesn't fly, but he lives, breathes, and I mean, that was the probably more interesting things is the dynamic. His son came to work for the company probably like 3 or 4 years ago, and when this whole transition was happening, going into Ethos. So his son is a detailed person, and it was kind of like Dad was the idea person. He doesn't really want to be stuck behind a desk, dealing with payroll and stuff like that. But his son could do that all day long. He's just one of those guys. He's an organized guy. So Dad is free to just dream, and the guy is absolutely relentless. I mean, the thing, if I were worried about as a competitor, is that this guy he doesn't sleep.
Yeah.
All he does is he works on stuff, and he is prolific. He comes out with brilliant stuff, and just when you think like, okay, I think we got it now, no, we're going to keep going. It's just like it's amazing what it is and the pace. Right now, our engineers are like working overtime on a project. They're just like nearly worked to death. They just keep going. So I think. The one thing, I mean, right now people are like, when I listen to John talk and he's like, oh yeah, if I'm going to buy a transmitter, it's going to be, if I'm going to move away from Jetty, it's going to be the Power Box or one of these other ones. So, I mean, right now, FRSKY is not really in the consideration for some of these like elite pilots, so they would never consider it. I'd say by the end of next year, it will be on the consideration list.
That's cool. I was just going to ask you too. So what's in the near future and maybe a year or two out with FRSKY? What do you guys have in the queue that you can share with us at least?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with sharing stuff with you is that I'll put it to you this way: it was this radio right here that made my life miserable. It's because it was actually and that was one of the big things that happened with FRSKY. We got really close to the community. The company never, when we were selling drone radios, they didn't have any interaction with the community. No one knew FRSKY people. But now it's kind of like we're there, we have a presence, we're at events, we're trying to engage with the community. And it is essentially, I mean, I was at Joe Knoll, and the president of the company came out to be in the booth with us, so we can see how we interact with people. And it was, I want to say this the nicest way possible. He didn't really, I mean, the CEO doesn't speak English very well. His son speaks English very well, but just, they didn't really have a comfort going and engaging with the community. And so now that they have these relationships they're starting to build, and they're just thriving with it, because literally when I tell them we had this customer and he had a problem, my manager will ask me a week later, well, you were talking to John and John had this problem, what happened? So he'll follow up with me by name and know what's going on. That's how engaged they are, and they live and breathe off this stuff. And like when there's problems, they jump on it like I've never seen before. So what's happening?
How did you end up? Like that's what I'm here. How do you go from being the iNav guy to getting? Did they know about you? Was there like did you run into them someplace?
No,
especially since he doesn't fly, which is it's kind of weird to me that the guy who makes the radios, who is predominantly for flying, right? They don't really make a lot of ground vehicle radios, right? So it's like it's interesting.
How did I end up there? Yeah, so we have a North American distribution center, which is about 16 miles from my house, and I just happened to go in there to get my stuff repaired, and started talking to the guys. And one of the service guys said, "I'm going to take you out flying. I'm going to take you flying iNav." And oops, yeah, my mic keeps.
Dude, by the time this podcast is over, he's going to need a new mic.
Yeah, about that. So So I invited this guy to go fly INAV planes with me, and he got involved in INAV, and I started to get to know all the people who worked there, and even the warehouse manager. And then it was like one day the warehouse manager was like, "Hey, why don't you work here?" And I'm like, I don't know. And then I'm sure. And then next thing I know, the service guy was texting the owner and like, "Here's a guy we got to meet, have an interview." And everything I have about this is always drama. Like as soon as I had the interview planned, scheduled, I'm sitting there reading my computer right here about FRSKY, just getting a little more familiar with the product line, that things I hadn't seen before. And my daughter comes in and she said, "I have COVID. Get tested now." So my interview was done on Skype.
Yeah. Yeah.
First time. Yeah. And so, there was essentially, they knew of me, and and I was able to bring the sense of like, let's go out and talk to people, and let's just focus on the segment and everything else. Now, the answer to the question you did ask about what's coming in the future, and some of the things that I can talk about. Well, the reason that radio would make me miserable is they put it out and it didn't come out for like 6 months. So, and a number of people are like, "Yeah, I'm gonna buy one of your radios, but I'm gonna wait for the Pro." It's just kind of like,
so sales went pew for a while.
No, the sales didn't really go down, but it was just kind of like, when we talk about stuff that's coming out, I do want to share some stuff so that you can have people go, "Wow, we FRSKY people are going to like," at this point, they're going to like, "All right, when Steve says this, start listening." All right. So number one, the company is opening a factory in Thailand. It is 4 times the size of the company of the factory we have now.
Wow.
So one of the things we're going after is the pistol grip radio market, so surface radios.
Wow.
And we think that that's going to be a very big market. The problem with that, it's worse than drones. You have to nail it the first time.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Because you can't come out with something that's somewhat promising and have people get excited about it. It's like people have been there, done that. The other thing is that the thing that I will make, what I believe is going to make a huge difference, is we're coming out. This is essentially a triple band transmitter. So it has 2.4 gigahertz FSK, which is the same thing as Archer or ACCST, whatever. Then there's the 2.4 gigahertz LoRa, long range. That is essentially very similar to what ELRS is. So it has that protocol, and it has 900 megahertz.
Wow. So it's going to do 3.
It does 3. We're coming out with a triple band receiver. It's going to be 24 channels. So the receiver itself will have built-in stabilization, GPS built in as well, 24 channels. And this is aimed for the turbine market. And it's going to have a couple of tricks up its sleeve that I think are going to hit the market by storm. It's just, I don't want to talk about what it is it's going to do, because I don't want to give our competitors a head start. What's going on. All I'm going to say is when it shows up, all of a sudden the conversation of like, what? And who, it's going to change.
Cool.
Very
That's awesome.
quickly.
I know a guy who could do a radio test on a YouTube channel.
We could put it on his plane. He could fly it kilometers out.
Now, do you guys have any plans for anything else other than, and this gets into maybe stuff that I would like to see coming from the Jetty world, is like anything non-radio and receiver related. So when I think about Jetty as an example, some of the things I really like about my Jetty system is like the remote on-off as a function. Some of the Jetty telemetry things and that type of stuff. Are you guys working on that as well? That aspect of things?
Okay, so that's a great question. We actually have, that's one of the products coming out right now, is we had an NFC switch. And I said for whatever reason, they stopped selling it about 2 months ago. Really pissed off people. It went into our nicer receivers. the 12 channel and higher receivers. And within about another couple weeks, we're coming out with the same one. What it's going to be is an NFC switch to turn it on, but you can remote on and off it with the transmitter.
Yeah. Perfect.
So the thing is that we get fed. I mean, essentially, we have Global Jets Club who told us that their whole club is switching over from a lot of the guys fly Jetty. They're switching over to FRSKY.
Yeah.
So they've been feeding us like, here's all the stuff we want on the radio. It was Mike Lynn from Global Jets who came up with this idea. I was at the meeting when it happened. That was October of last year. And it was a radio that we had for sale in September of this year.
Yeah. Okay.
August, September timeframe. So it's amazing how fast the company can move. It nearly killed us because that was a lot of work that went into it. But yeah, there's also the other thing is that the firmware, it's like it gets updated all the time. So when I explain to people, this is a transmitter you buy, but it's not the same transmitter that you're going to have. Now I know you're used to buying a transmitter, and you take it out of the box, and whatever's on the transmitter, that's what you get. And if you want new features, you're going to have to buy another transmitter. No, this thing gets updated like all the time.
Yeah.
The next update is coming out around Christmas time. Maybe it might be a couple weeks later after that. But right around that time frame, it's a laundry list of all the things we should have fixed in Ethos that all at once. So it's going to have our receivers do have telemetry. We have better telemetry than Jetty has. We will have the ability, like Jetty, where you can look at your flight and look at all your telemetry logs after the flight. We do have sensors, so we have the pitot tubes. We do have GPS. We have, so we have our own line of servos now, and that's going to be reinforced as well, where you can literally get the telemetry from your servos through your flight. And you can see how much, if you have a problem, if one aileron's maybe pulling too much current, maybe there's binding or something like that. Just look at telemetry logs.
What range are you going at after for the servos? Are you going more towards the turbine guys with the servos? Are you going more towards the foamy guys with the servos, or the balsa guys? Like, what are the servos targeted towards?
We have an exact 5405. That one is what private labeled that one for Global Jets. I think we sold about 500 so far. No issues. It has 763 ounce-inch of torque.
Is it a
that's a powerful
higher end?
What was the question?
Is it priced as a higher end servo, or is it
retails $80 to the end user?
What were you saying, John? That's a good torque.
That's a high torque servo for sure. So
0.12 sweep, 8.4 volts, 60-degree sweep. So yeah, it's a good servo, and they're going to be improving as well. The whole thing is that what we're looking at is trying to improve the line so that you have the full electronics package. We have a stabilized receiver. Part of the thing that we're having right now is that it's on Lewis scripts, and a lot of people, I'm sure John could load a Lewis script. I know you can load a Lewis script. A lot of people can't load Lewis scripts. So this next version of Ethos, no more Lewis scripts. But these receivers, we have an 18-channel receiver that has built-in stabilization that retails for $145.
Nice.
And I tell people, well, we got the manual, we have it all written up. First time you put it together, spend an evening, you'll get it together, it will work. The next time will be about an hour and a half, and the third time will be 20 minutes. And by the third time, you're like, okay, I've got it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's funny because I'm into 3D printing, and I kind of had that same spiel with two of my family members took advantage of the Micro Center $100 Ender 3 deal, new to 3D printing. And I'm like, you have to watch a couple of videos, sit down. Your first print is always going to be the hardest, right? But once you do it and you get through it and you know what to do, your second and third and fourth print becomes really easy once you start knowing what to do with the machine. And it's the same kind of theory, right? Figure it out, know it, and then once you know it and spend the time up front, it gets easier on the long run.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We're trying to make things easier and easier, and you're going to see stuff here in the next. I think what people are going to get really excited about this Ethos release because there's like a lot of cool features. I don't know if you knew this, but OpenDX had the ability where you could be flying your transmitter, and you're flying along, and you're like, okay, I'm holding the left stick a little to the left, and I'm holding up elevator a little bit. Push a button in the back of your radio, and it will lock in your trims. Insta trim. So that's coming out. So things like that. A lot of really cool features are coming out as far as that's concerned.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That's nice to hear for sure. I think that's what. And you made the point. I mean, when you're coming from a different radio manufacturer, you want the features. You don't want to be giving up some of that stuff, right? So it's nice to hear that you guys are working on that.
I mean, next year it's just going to be continuing. I mean, I thought they were going to be done with it by the end of this year. We're kind of done with the fixed wing market and kind of like whatever we have or so. No, it's going to keep going next year and probably the year after as well. And it's going to get honed and honed and honed. And, we have something that's kind of the Ethos operating system's only been out for a couple of years. So it's still relatively new. A lot of these things, where I go back to management and say, it's not good enough, seriously. If you want to compete in this market with people who are spending $30,000 on planes, you can't have this. We can charge more money for something that's better. We can't justify something that's not as good.
Right. Speaking of radios and radio tests and stuff like that, and I swore there was a rebuttal to your video, John. I swore a Powerbox video the other day.
Yeah, they came out with that a couple weeks ago, I think. So
yeah, I happened to watch it the other day. Yeah. I mean, they did a decent job in the video. The only thing that I would have liked to have seen differently in the way they did it was, and that was a big thing for me, is there was no controlling of the servo, right? It's like they had it on a switch. So for me, that's not
9 kilometers or whatever it was, and then
you flick a switch, and for me, that's not like an accurate representation. Even though they wanted to show that the camera was the same timing and everything like that, but it's like, well, how do I know there isn't a guy like right behind you that just flicked the switch and the servo is working? You know what I mean? Like,
Now this is probably like I do some of my live streams here from the shop, but I'll defend myself a little bit on this whole radio test thing right now. And there's probably not going to be a lot of Powerbox guys that actually watch this whole podcast all the way through. Right. Maybe they will. But everything I said about the Powerbox radio during that test was positive.
Right.
Like, most of the guys that are hating on that video, they saw like the Powerbox portion, or they looked at the end of the video and that was it. Or any radio. Like, there's guys that said, oh, you used a Futaba radio that's whatever, 10 years old or something like that. Well, if you actually watch the entire video all the way through, I gave Powerbox props for, number one, sending me the radio to test, because we don't have any around here that I could use. And there was steps throughout the entire video where I gave them props for what they did.
Right.
And I think I even said in that video, I believe I said in that video, if I wasn't flying Jetty, I would be flying Powerbox. I think I said that in the video. But anyways, guys are butthurt about that video, and that's okay. I've moved on, but I still find it funny when it's still going on the forums and everything. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I kind of get a feeling that, and this happens when a company sends somebody something, they're kind of expecting somebody to do like a glowing review. I'm not going to mention any names. So I've been working on sponsors for the podcast and stuff like that, and talking to some people. And I was talking to somebody, and we were working stuff out. And I did a video recently on one of their planes, and there's a couple of design issues with it. It's not perfect, and for a foam plane, and it's a relatively cheap foam plane, you shouldn't have to do that much to it to kind of just get it in the air, right? And I didn't knock it. Great design, great little plane for the price. I don't know, it's under $200. It comes with a bunch of stuff. I mean, for me, you can't build one of those foam board planes for that, right? So But now it's like, ever since I kind of said some of that stuff, it's like they've gone silent on the line. And it's like, I'm never going to mess with my integrity, right? Like,
Yeah.
we owe people who watch our videos and stuff like that, we owe them honest opinions, not just paid ones by companies.
I share that feeling as well, for sure. Absolutely.
That's what it comes down to. We owe that. So maybe that's kind of what happened. You know, it's possible.
Well, there's been benefits like, so yeah, maybe the radio test. I see it a lot on my aircraft that I build. So I've been building Skymaster aircraft for a long time. Most people that have ever had a Skymaster aircraft, they say, well, yeah, it showed up, but it has this problem, and this problem. Well, since I've actively been doing the channel, there's been a lot of improvements on the Skymaster aircraft, and they don't come out and they don't announce it or anything like that. But the latest generation of kits that we've been getting, they're awesome.
Yeah.
And I don't get paid by Skymaster or anything like that. I just happen to build a lot of their aircraft, and yeah, they've improved on a lot of things. And I think I hear from a lot of people, I get a lot of emails and stuff, and I hear from a lot of people saying that they appreciate the videos that I do because it's helping the manufacturers build better stuff. So,
right. Yeah.
That's Skymaster. So that you get that from Pacific Jets?
No, I get all my stuff through Jets North. So Doug is in Canada. So he services all of North America, but yeah, he's
I know Pacific Jets has been very hands-on. You know, they give feedback to the manufacturers, so they sell Skymaster,
of course.
And then there's also, I don't know if you've seen that guy with the EV with the Bandit, that new plane that came out.
Yeah.
You seen that? Yeah, that one's an interesting story. I mean, I was at in March of this year, I was at Bomber Field.
Yeah.
And this guy walks up and he's looking at the radios, and he's like, oh, really cool radios. And he's like, yeah, I have this design for this plane. And I don't know. It was really, I've been working on it for a long time. And do you know anyone who can make this plane? I'm like, stand right here. And I remember I went and found Dirk, and Dirk is sitting down. And if you know, I don't know if you know the guy or not.
Yeah.
You know him. Yeah. So he's kind of a hothead, and I tapped him on the shoulder like, Dirk, there's someone you have to meet. And I could tell he was annoyed that I was interrupting him.
Yeah.
And I said, but he was like, he held it for a second, and he comes over, and I was like, this guy has the design for a jet. You should talk to him. And like an hour later, they're still talking. And this was that guy, is it Victor Solis? Last name is Solis, the nicest guy in the world. And it's just kind of like, he gave his design to Dirk, and Dirk and Jeff went through it, and they're like, nope. And he was like trying to defend all these things. And then finally he's like, oh yeah, I get it. You guys are right. So that's really, it's kind of cool when you can kind of see the hobby evolve like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I don't know if you guys saw that Red X20S transmitter.
Yes.
Okay, you've seen it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So the story behind that was that we had, I was talking to director of sales, you know, like we kind of have these really blue and black radios. We each have some colors.
Yeah.
And so she was like, kind of, one day here's a color, it's this beautiful cherry red looking cardinal red transmitter. And they made it in the X18, and I said, you should make it in the X20. And she's then my manager was like, we don't think it's going to look very good in the X20. And I'm like, oh, I have 25 years of photography experience. I know what things look like in different colors. I can visualize it. I said, this thing's going to look amazing.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so they said, well, we're not certain. I said, well, do me a favor. I know you're going to be paint another batch. Paint me some shells. I'll get our service guys to make a few. Just make me a few shells. They'll put one together. I'll take it to shows and show it to people, so if they want to order it. And then they said, okay, we can do that. And as it got closer to the time, I said, you know what? How about we do this? Why don't we make 10 of these? Just give me 10 of them. I will sell them. And not only that, I will buy them. I'll personally pay for them out of my own salary so you can have this. And then they finally said, well, okay, we can do that, but see if you can get some orders for it. And it was like December 20th of last year. And we're on the phone, and I was calling my dealers up and like, please buy this. And how many would you like? And I mean, and they're like taking it on face value. Like, this thing's going to be amazing. Just wait till it comes out. And then it was like an explosion after that happened. So yeah, that was like fun experience. I mean, and the company is very responsive as far as that kind of stuff. And when people have ideas and things like that, we've listened to it, or especially complaints when people have problems, they really jump on top of it to find solutions for the problem. So yeah, it's all around. It's been a real fun experience. I get to travel the United States and go to all these flying events, and